Okay, just wanted to make a quick example video about how there's differences between IFRS and US GAAP lessee accounting. So first of all, IFRS. Let me make this bigger. Okay, you have IFRS. So IFRS, you have operating leases and financing leases, okay? And then these are treated the same as US GAAP leases for financing only, not operating. So US GAAP operating leases are different treated, okay? So, here we go. These are lessee, okay? Let's be clear, lessee. Okay, so what we have to do now is we have to illustrate the difference between IFRS operating, IFRS financing, US GAAP financing, lessee accounting, and US GAAP operating leases. Because these three are the same, this one's different. So let's start. So we have operating, IFRS, okay, operating, financing, okay, and US GAAP financing. Okay, so on the balance sheet, you're going to do two things. You're going to generate two things. On the balance sheet, you're going to have a liability, and you're going to have an asset. It's going to be called the right of use asset under the on the balance sheet. So you have let's start with the right of use asset. It's called right of use asset. We'll refer to it as ROU from now on. Okay, then you also have a lease liability that's generated on the balance sheet. The ROU asset is amortized using straight line amortization, and lease liability is amortized using the effective interest rate method. Okay, we won't be going into a specific example. I'm just giving a quick overview. So that's the effects on the balance sheet. ROU asset is generated, lease liability is generated. ROU is amortized using straight line amortization. The liability is amortized using the effective interest rate method. Okay, now the income statement. Income statement. So there's going to be two things on the income statement. You're going to have interest expense generated, and you're going to have amortization. Okay, so then that's it. That's all you need to know. You can calculate interest expense using the effective interest rate method, and then amortization using straight line. We should also probably talk about like what you're amortizing. What you're amortizing the ROU asset, but what is the value of the ROU asset? The value of the ROU asset and the lease liability is present value of the future lease payments. So that's pretty easy. That's just the present value calculation. So next, what we have to do is figure out cash flow stuff. So there's a difference between IFRS and US GAAP as far as cash flow is calculated when you're doing these lease stuff. So under IFRS, the interest expense, as you well know, can be categorized as CFO or CFF. Depends on who your guy is. And under US GAAP, interest expense is only CFF. Wait, right? Yeah, no, that's right. No, it's CFO, excuse me. But then principal, cash flow, IFRS, interest expense, CFO, CFF. You can choose. Under US GAAP, interest expense will only be CFO though. So, What we have to do next is we have to do, well, that's accounting for the interest expense. What about the principal? Well, luckily, principal is pretty easy. It's just cash flow for financing under both IFRS and US GAAP. Cool? So that's how you do lessee financing leases. So let's erase this. And now, I remember when I told you there's a difference between IFRS, lessee, IFRS, lessee, financing, operating, and US GAAP financing, lessee, accounting, and the US GAAP operating. So now we have to cover US GAAP operating. Okay, so, very similar situation here. So your balance sheet's going to look pretty similar, if we're being honest. It's just going to look just a little bit different. So you're still going to have an ROU asset on the balance sheet. Balance sheet. Okay, and you're still going to have a lease liability. Okay, so the only difference, well, let's start again. So like the value of these things is going to be the present value of the future lease payments. That's a simple time value money question. That's easy peasy. And then we go over here and we'll say, well, how do you amortize this stuff? Well, that's pretty easy. Here's where the difference is. The key difference here is that the ROU asset is amortized using not straight line, but effective interest rate method. Basically, it's the same as the lease liability. The lease liability under US GAAP operating, lessee lease, two E's, not or. That's wrong. Lessee, okay. ROU asset is amortized using effective interest rate method. Lease liability is amortized using effective interest rate method. That's the difference. Point blank, period. On the income statement, there's also a difference. You don't have broken apart interest expense, amortization. No, US GAAP is too good for that. So US GAAP operating lessee leases have just one line item. It's called lease expense. Pretty simple. And it will be a combination of interest expense plus principal. Okay, pretty simple. And the cash flow statement. Oh shoot, what's the cash flow? I forgot. I think it's all CFO. Let me check my notes. So IFRS. No, I need US GAAP, lessee accounting. Yeah, everything is under CFO. And that's the difference between let me use a different color to make a point here. That's the difference between lessee, IFRS, financing, operating, US GAAP financing versus US GAAP operating leases. So there's a difference between IFRS financing leases, lessee, okay, IFRS lessee financing leases, operating leases, US GAAP lessee financing leases, and US GAAP lessee operating leases. And those are the differences. Thanks for watching. I'm going to come up with another video about the differences between lessor accounting. That's pretty easy, I think, compared to all this BS. Basically, under lessor, it's the same treatment basically between US GAAP and US GAAP and IFRS. But there's like a nuance between the financing leases and the operating leases. So, yeah, pretty basic stuff. See you next time.